Now, why are companies embracing the re-entry internship? Because the internship allows the employer to base their hiring decision on an actual work sample instead of a series of interviews, and the employer does not have to make that permanent hiring decision until the internship period is over. This testing out period removes the perceived risk that some managers attach to hiring relaunchers, and they are attracting excellent candidates who are turning into great hires. Think about how far we have come. Before this, most employers were not interested in engaging with relaunchers at all. But now, not only are programs being developed specifically with relaunchers in mind, but you can't even apply for these programs unless you have a gap on your resume. This is the mark of real change, of true institutional shift, because if we can solve this problem for relaunchers, we can solve it for other career transitioners too. In fact, an employer just told me that their Veterans Return to Work program is based on their re-entry internship program. And there's no reason why there can't be a retiree internship program. Different pool, same concept. So, the idea I'd like to propose today is this. One of the most effective ways of building strong fundamentals in students and preparing them for the future, ironically enough, is by looking to the past through the teaching of Latin. Latin will help students think more logically, communicate more effectively, and have a more comprehensive understanding of the world around them, no matter how technologically advanced that world may become. To begin with, let's address a common misconception that Latin is a dead language spoken by ancient European 2000 years ago, holding no relevance whatsoever for people living in the 21st century. There's even an old poem that expresses the point of view. Latin is a language, as dead can be. First it killed the Romans and now it's killing me. Now students may feel this way sometimes, but this simply is not true. The reality is that Latin never died, and never came to a crashing end with the death of a single tragic figure. It's simply evolved gradually over time and developed into the other languages. Moreover, classic Latin is still very much alive and well in government, art, religion, literature, medicine, law and science. It's not dead language. It's an eternal language. Tattoos have often been presented in popular media as either marks of the dangerous and deviant or trendy youth fads. But while tattoo styles come and go, and their meaning has differed greatly across cultures, the practice is as old as civilization itself. Decorative skin markings have been discovered in human remains all over the world, with the oldest found on a Peruvian mummy dating back to 6000 BCE. But have you ever wondered how tattooing really works? You may know that we shed our skin, losing about 30–40,000 skin cells per hour. That's about 1 million per day. So, how come the tattoo doesn't gradually flake off along with them? The simple answer is that tattooing involves getting pigment deeper into the skin than the outermost layer that gets shed. Throughout history, different cultures have used various methods to accomplish this. But the first modern tattooing machine was modeled after Thomas Edison's engraving machine and ran on electricity. Tattooing machines used today insert tiny needles, loaded with dye, into the skin at a frequency of 50 to 3000 times per minute. The needles punch through the epidermis, allowing ink to seep deep into the dermis, which is composed of collagen fibers, nerves, glands, blood vessels and more. Every time a needle penetrates, it causes a wound that alerts the body to begin the inflammatory process, calling immune system cells to the wound site to begin repairing the skin. And it is this very process that makes tattoos permanent.
But if we're to ask you a similar question, what percentage of the population do you think is capable of truly mastering calculus, or understanding organic chemistry, or being able to contribute to cancer research? A lot of you might say, well, with a great education system, maybe 20–30%. But what if that estimate is just based on your own experience in a non-mastery framework, your own experience with yourself or observing your peers, where you're being pushed at this set pace through classes, accumulating all these gaps? Even when you got that 95%, what was that 5% you missed? And it keeps accumulating all the way you get to an advanced class. All of a sudden you hit a wall and say, I'm not meant to be a cancer researcher. Not meant to be a physicist, not meant to be a mathematician. I suspect that actually is the case, but if you were allowed to be operating in a mastery framework, if you were allowed to really take agency over your learning, and when you get something wrong, embrace it, view that failure is a moment of learning, that number of the percent that could really master calculus or understand organic chemistry is actually a lot closer to 100%. And this isn't even just a nice to have. Think it's a social imperative. But for these things that we actually do really care about and do experience profound regret around, what does that experience feel like? We all know the short answer. It feels terrible. Regret feels awful. But it turns out that regret feels awful in 4 very specific and consistent ways. So, the first consistent component of regret is basically denial. When I went home that night after getting my tattoo, I basically stayed up all night. And for the first several hours, there was exactly one thought in my head. And the thought was, make it go away. This is an unbelievably primitive emotional response. It's right up there with, I want my mommy. We're not trying to solve the problem. We're not trying to understand how the problem came about. We just want it to vanish. The second characteristic component of regret is a sense of bewilderment. So, the other thing thought about there in my bedroom that night was, how could have done that? What was thinking? This real sense of alienation from the part of us that made a decision we regret. We can't identify with that part. We don't understand that part. And we certainly don't have any empathy for that part, which explains the third consistent component of regret, which is an intense desire to punish ourselves. That's why, in the face of our regret, the thing we consistently say is, I could have kicked myself. The fourth component here is that regret is what psychologists call perseverative. To perseverate means to focus obsessively and repeatedly on the exact same thing. Now the effect of perseveration is to basically take these
An ant is pretty stupid. It doesn't have much of a brain, no will, no plan, and yet, many ants together are smart. An ant colony can construct complex structures. Some colonies keep farms of fungi, others take care of cattle. They can wage war or defend themselves. How is this possible? How can a bunch of stupid things do smart things together? This phenomenon is called emergence, and it's one of the most fascinating and mysterious features of our universe. In a nutshell, it describes small things forming bigger things that have different properties than the sum of their parts. Emergence is complexity arising from simplicity, and emergence is everywhere. Water has vastly different properties to the molecules that make it up, like the concept of wetness. Take wet fabric. If you zoom in far enough, there is no wetness. There are just molecules sitting in the spaces between the atoms of the cloth. Wetness is an emerging property of water. Something new only created by a lot of individual interactions between water molecules. And this is sort of it. Many things interact under a certain set of rules, creating something above and beyond themselves. Sometimes ignorance is preferable to the detailed truth. Maybe, we only care about truth insofar as it empowers us. Knowing and thinking about all of the details of every orange tree would just be a psychological burden for the most of us. I'll take illusion over the reality. But can't help but ask, is it possible that the mind is actually accessing a deeper kind of truth? Maybe, the mind is separating the signal from the noise. But what constitutes signal versus noise? Our values. A farmer that values knowing all the details of an orange tree will view it differently than a regular person. Well, where do our values come from? Here's Nietzsche's view from beyond good and evil. Behind all logic and its seeming sovereignty of movement, their two stand valuations are, more clearly, physiological demands for the preservation of a certain type of life. For Nietzsche, our values come from our physiological demands, and what does our physiology demand? Power. It wants to survive and thrive. What does it mean to thrive? To imagine the world a certain way and to be able to make that illusion a reality. Someone could try to contest this idea, by saying that they don't seek power or want to thrive, they won't eat or drink anything to prove this point. But, they would, still, be seeking a kind of power. They imagine a world in which they prove the idea wrong and they seek to bring that world into fruition, even at their own expense. So then begs the question, what if we cover the entire desert with solar panels? How much energy would we actually be able to produce and how would this change our planet? Let's take a deep dive. For starters, let's begin here. This is the Where's That solar power station in Morocco, the world's largest concentrated solar power plant currently in existence in a marvel of modern engineering. Once fully completed and operational, the plant will take up an area of 25 square kilometers and be capable of producing 582 megawatts of electricity. It will even be capable of storing solar energy in the form of superheated molten salt, which allows for further production of electricity even into the night. After investing more than $9 billion into their solar energy objective, Morocco aims to create 4 additional plants similar to this one in the Sahara that will collectively create more than 2,000 megawatts of electricity production, which will be enough to provide for roughly 38% of all of Morocco's annual electricity needs. This project will transform Morocco into the world's leading solar energy state, and is the only African country that currently has a power cable linked to Europe. Much of this energy will be exported for profit to the countries of the European Union. But all of this energy is created from just 5 relatively small plants. Sometimes ignorance is preferable to the detailed truth. Maybe, we only care about truth insofar as it empowers us. Knowing and thinking about all of the details of every orange tree would just be a psychological burden for the most of us. I'll take illusion over the reality. But can't help but ask, is it possible that the mind is actually accessing a deeper kind of truth? Maybe, the mind is separating the signal from the noise. But what constitutes signal versus noise? Our values. A farmer that values knowing all the details of an orange tree will view it differently than a regular person. Well, where do our values come from? Here's Nietzsche's view from beyond good and evil. Behind all logic and its seeming sovereignty of movement, their two stand valuations are, more clearly, physiological demands for the preservation of a certain type of life. For Nietzsche, our values come from our physiological demands, and what does our physiology demand? Power. It wants to survive and thrive. What does it mean to thrive? To imagine the world a certain way and to be able to make that illusion a reality. Someone could try to contest this idea by saying that they don't seek power or want to thrive, they won't eat or drink anything to prove this point. But, they would, still, be seeking a kind of power. They imagine a world in which they prove the idea wrong and they seek to bring that world into fruition, even at their own expense.
As a speech-language pathologist and as a multilingual mother of bilingual children, I am finding myself shocked and confused at the number of parents I run into who have chosen not to speak their native language to their children for various reasons, or who have been persuaded to believe that speaking their native language to their children will hurt them socially or academically if the primary language of the community is different. So why should parents talk to their children in their native language? The first and simplest reason is that it is the language in which they are likely to be most dominant or proficient, which in turn is the language in which they are able to provide quality language input as well as support effectively and consistently. Even if a parent is able to pick up the language of the community, that parent's vocabulary, grammar skills, and ease of communication will probably remain stronger in the native language. I've often heard of recommendations from professionals and educators for parents to stop speaking the native language so that confusion is not created, so that language delays won't occur, so that children can do well in school, but the research literature says the exact opposite. The other occurrence that appears to be more prevalent is for the native language to be spoken from birth to preschool, with a sudden shift to the community language once the child enters early intervention programs or school.